I'm just going to say a few words, firstly because I think our speaker deserves 2 introductions. That's a sort of minimum set. But I suppose also just to extend the welcome on behalf of the whole of the school, and I think Vishan will extend the welcome on behalf of the real estate program. And you know more or less the history that that this school was established in 1881, and it was an American idea to have an architecture school in a university. We always wanted to be in the university, and the university's always said for hundreds of years, no, we know what you're about. You make buildings, that's real stuff in the world, and we're about separation from the world. We kept saying, yeah, but we're intellectuals, we're cultural people. They still didn't buy the argument. In the 15th century, we said, actually, we don't make buildings, we make drawings of buildings, and other people make the buildings. And they said, still doesn't work, but we'll get you a ticket into the academy. So we became early members of the first academies of art and so on. The idea of an architecture school in a university is an American idea, and the guy that had the idea is the one that founded this school in 1881. And I've often thought about that. What does it mean? Why does a major research university with a global responsibility need a school of architecture? And of course, the reason they needed it was at that point in time, America was undergoing rapid urbanization. There were 28% urbanized in 1881, having been about 15% urbanized 40 years earlier, and America would be 50% urbanized by 1920. That is to say, this school was formed exactly at the cusp of rapid urbanization. So basically, the university decided that it needed a research unit that was intelligent about cities in the same way as university is a place for reducing stupidity in the world. We should do our best to reduce stupidity in the formation of cities. That meant a whole succession of programs, architecture, then planning, then urban design, then historic preservation. And about 25 years ago, real estate development. And even though real estate development was fully understood as a kind of crucial component of the future of cities and therefore of a school like this one, that didn't mean that this school knew what to do with that fact. And in fact, the school long had this tradition that we taught one half of the school how to make money, the real estate program, and the other half of the program how to lose money, the architects. And in fact, we trained the architects to lose the money of the developers. So as you can imagine, there was really not much room for dialogue between the two. But boy, have things changed a lot. And now I would say, I'm really proud to say one of the reasons to be extraordinarily proud, all of us, of what's going on in the school right now, is that there's really not an architect here who wants to be naive about money, and that used to be a great, sign of your talent, was to be stupid about money as an architect. Nobody wants to be stupid. Every student wants to be an intelligent participant in the discussion of the shaping of money. Once architects figured out that money has a shape, they got excited. Likewise, the real estate development students and teachers have become extraordinarily interested in design, and in which way can design act as a form of leverage, and in which way will a real estate development professional have no choice about this. It's going to be about design, and the question is, what position you take. And so no better speaker to capture this new synergy than the speaker tonight. So I just want to express what a great honor you do us by coming to the school. The Durst organization is held in incredibly high regard throughout the school. But one example is enough. Of course, the building on Bryant Park represents every aspiration in terms of new synergies between development, design. And if you see that ice plant in the bottom of that building, you have to know things have changed, and you have to know design leadership is not coming anymore from the place that you used to think about it. And I can finish with one example. We had an event the other day at the Center for Architecture, which is really the state of the art of the school, on the Columbia's Building Intelligence Project, which is based on the idea that no industry is more stupid than the building industry. And if we are concerned with reducing stupidity, we should be working with industry professionals in the construction industry. So we had one of our cutting-edge debates where we bring people around from all over the world to talk about what's happening, what are the latest ideas. And not by accident was that same building, the architects of that building presenting the detailed scheme for the environmental regulation and so on of that building, presented as one of the state-of-the-art examples. So for me, it's a great thrill to be able to go from what the architecture program thinks of it as its most cutting-edge event, and there is this building in Bryant Park. And then tonight we're with the real estate program's cutting edge, and it's the same building, so we might as well get the guy, and I think it's just a great thing that you're here. And all of this will be said much more elegantly by Vishan, but just to say, this is the whole school very excited. Thanks very much for coming.
Good evening, everyone. This is a great moment for us, both as a program and for me personally. This is one of the great heroes of our field. And, you know, it's interesting, the dean often talks about how this building is about both the history of our professions, in terms of Avery Library, the great holder of our archives, and then the studios, which is about the future of our professions and what comes next. And in many ways, I think of the Durst organization in exactly the same framework. An organization whose history is so important to it. As soon as you walk in the doors, you understand from the collections and the archives and so forth how important the family history is, and yet constantly building the most forward-looking buildings and leading the profession into the future. And so I think there's this great kind of mirror between the organization and what we hope to achieve here in the school and with our program. Douglas Durst is the chairman of the Durst organization. He is the third generation to run the Durst organization, one of New York City's most respected developers, owners, and management companies, and one of the originators, and this is really true, of the green building movement far, far before it ever became popular. It founded in 1915 by Douglas's grandfather, Joseph Durst. The organization has been responsible for over the last 95 years for transforming the skyline of Manhattan. Beginning in the late 1950s, the Durst organization began to develop office buildings along the 3rd Avenue corridor from 42nd Street North to 50th Street. When Douglas joined the firm in 1970, it was at the start of their West Side development, which resulted in another 3 office buildings along the Avenue of the Americas. Under his leadership, the organization became the catalyst for large-scale development of the new Times Square, with the completion of 4 Times Square at 42nd and Broadway. I realized today while reading applications that some of our applicants are going to be born when President Clinton first got inaugurated and therefore may not remember what 42nd Street looked like. It is truly one of the epic urban transformations of our lifetimes, and I think it never would have been possible without the foresight of the Durst organization under Douglas's leadership. 4 Times Square is the first speculative office building that incorporated environmentally responsible design and building practices. Today, the Durst organization has completed the building of the Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park, which is, we should say, the most environmentally advanced office tower in the world. Just a little personal biography on Douglas. Douglas was born in New York City in 1944. He graduated from Fieldston and the University of California at Berkeley in 1966, and I quote his bio, where he studied economics and learned civil disobedience. After 2 years of study at the Urban Studies program in New York University, he joined the Durst organization, learning from his father Seymour and his 2 uncles, Roy and David. He is a director of the Real Estate Board of New York, the Landmarks Conservancy, the New School, the Municipal Art Society, and the Project for Public Spaces. He is also the co-chair of the Friends of the Hudson River Park and has been involved with the theatrical arts for many years and is a member of the board of directors of the Roundabout Theater, Primary Stages, and the Town Hall. In addition, he has been an environmentalist activist for many years and is a part owner of the largest organic farm in New York State. We learned this from Helena last fall. I love that fact. For relaxation, he rides horses, bicycles, and skis, and for aggravation, much like our dean, he plays tennis. I bring you the great Douglas Durst. Thanks so much.
Well, you heard it all, so I don't know what else I have to say. But thank you, Vashon. As Vashon said, I am chairman of the Durst organization. I officially retired last summer so that I could spend less time with my family. I actually have unretired. The joke got a little old, and I got very busy downtown. Is this advanced?
So I can do it for you.
No, I
You can do it yourself. You got it.
Whoops. Maybe you should have done it for me. We in front of you to your left, you see a picture of 4 Times Square and the Bank of America Tower. The 4 Times Square we built, we started in 1995 after having litigated against the state. It's part of the 42nd Street redevelopment project. And the last time I was here, I spoke about our involvement in that. Because we had been involved in a litigation, we learned more about the project than anybody else involved, including those responsible, and realized that the tax benefits that the city provided were enormously beneficial. We acquired what ESACs, which is a lecture for a different time, excess site acquisition costs. The city made a deal with the developer at the time, Prudential and George Klein, that they capped the amount of the cost for the land, and anything over that cap, I think it was $70 or $80 million, the developer would get back in real estate taxes. His taxes would be reduced by half amount of the excess. We paid about $50 million for $80 million of ESACs. Because those ESACs earned interest are now worth about $110 million. I had tried to convince the city that this was not a clever idea on their part, but it ended up working out very well for us. From there, that was finished in 1999, and we then acquired the rest of the site from Times Square to 6th Avenue, and eventually Bank of America came along, and that was in 2002. We had just made the decision that there would be no more development for quite a while, and we're getting ready to mothball the land and rent out the retail when the Bank of America came along. And so we did something that we don't like to do. We agreed to have them as a partner. They rented half the building and owned half the building. Our first meeting was in November of 2002. Told them that if they acted quickly, we could move them in April of 2008. They were a little slow, and they moved in May of 2008. If you can see on top of 4 Times Square, there is a antenna mast. When the World Trade Center came down, there was the Empire State Building was both primary and backup for TV and radio broadcast. They were talking about building a tower in New Jersey. We didn't want New Jersey to be broadcasting our TV, so we installed that mast, 375 feet tall, on top of an occupied building, and now have 2 primary and about 6 backup and half a dozen radio stations broadcasting from it. The point I'm making is that we are opportunistic investors. We don't have one set strategy. In 2006, we formed a partnership with the Fettner family to develop residential. Together, we've developed 2 buildings, and they put their portfolio in with ours, and we now manage 2,000 residential buildings. The last 2 were both gold LEED buildings. You're looking out the windows of the Epic on 30th and between 6th and Broadway. You see the sign for the McEnroe Farm. If you go up, there's a little plug here, if you go up 22, our farm stand is 5 miles north of Amenia, and I do hope you go there and buy it. The food is great. We also, because of our involvement in that area, we sort of stumbled onto land that Tom Carvel had bought. It was 2,000 acres. We bought it in 2001 and have spent the last 9 years trying to get it permitted. We're very hopeful that soon we'll get there. So our strategy is really, as I said, opportunistic. But we're long-term investors. We're a family business. We're thinking not about next year or 5 years, but generationally. Our buildings, we still have the first buildings we built, and every year about a third of our cash flow goes into rebuilding our buildings. We, except for the Bank of America and now our partnership with the Port Authority downtown, we don't have any partners. We use our own equity to build. We have, my cousin Jody and I are the chief executives. It takes us about 5 minutes to make a decision. So it's very efficient, and our buildings are very efficient. Our buildings are built to be used. It's very important that you realize that the buildings are not just something to look at, but something to be occupied. Each building has a different purpose. Each building has to be designed for its site and for its use. And what we try and do when we build a building is to make it a better building than the last building. Each time we go through a series of retreats with the professionals to try and figure out how we're going to make this better, how we can learn from the mistakes. When I started in the business, each building was built just like the last one. It's very expensive, obviously, to build buildings. So if you build what you built last time, you know what your mistakes are. And your mistakes, and you learn to live with them. We try and make new mistakes. It's very important. The only way that you learn how to get ahead in this business is by making mistakes. The other thing that we do is we hired 15 years ago one of the investment banks to help us figure out what direction to go as a business. My cousin Jody and I were taking over the leadership. We were trying to decide how to structure the business. We spent about 6 months with the investment bank, paid them a considerable amount of money, and they said, well, you've been muddling along for 70 years. It's worked for you. You should keep it up. So we've set ourselves up as a family business. The business is run by the family, but everybody who works for us is considered part of the family. We have employees whose parents have worked for us. We have tenants who started with us 50 years ago and have expanded. And so our model really is a family business. And as I said, all our strategy is based upon a long-term investment. We're looking to make sure that our buildings last from generation to generation. On your left is my grandparents in 1907, we believe on their wedding day. My grandfather arrived in this country in 1903. He had, we're told, $3 sewn into his coat. He got work after a day, and the next day he sent 2 of those dollars back because they needed him more at home than here. Then in 1958, you see my grandfather with my father and his 2 brothers, and there I am with somewhat longer hair in '82, and 2010, my son Alexander, my cousin Jody, Elena, and to my left is Chris, Jody's brother. This helps us provide, there's a continuity of knowledge that comes with having a family business, so that as we go from one generation taking over to the next, they have learned everything that I know. And as Vishaan will tell you, Elena's learned more than I know. Everybody who works in our buildings is an employee of our business. When I came into the business, when I started when I took over control, we were hiring outside cleaning companies, outside security, but we don't, when you do that, you lose control of the business. Many people use the cleaning companies to generate additional income. We generate our income from our rents. We're a service business, and we want to provide the best service, so everybody who works there is employed there, and it's their goal to make us the best real estate managers in the business. You see at the top and the bottom are engine rooms. You heard that we have our ice plant. Our engine rooms all have the same color code. Everybody goes from one building to another. Nobody works very long, or they work for a couple of years and then move on, so they're all familiar with the various buildings, and because it's all the same color code, it's easy to move. This is the first building that, large office building my family acquired on 3rd Avenue. My father began acquiring property on 3rd Avenue in the 50s after the L came down. He began assembling land in the late 40s and early 50s for others. He then saw that there was more money to be made in building them, and so instead of selling the site that he had worked on 3rd Avenue, at 655 3rd Avenue, my father and his two brothers built that building. It was the Lorillard building. Now it is the Mitsubishi building. It's the headquarters for Mitsubishi. It's a building that's 60 years old, but is still a modern Class A office building because we are constantly improving our buildings. After you see the flow up 3rd Avenue in the late 60s, my father saw that the sites on 3rd Avenue were going to be full, and he started acquiring land on the west side. At one point, that's a model of what was his dream. He called it Rockefeller Center South. He had acquired all the land from 42nd, 6th to Broadway, 42nd to 47th. Unfortunately, the recession of the 70s came along, and we weren't able to hold on to it. We were able to build 4 of the buildings. 1133 6th Avenue was the first, followed by 1155. That was one of the first buildings that I was involved in. 114 U.S. Trust Building, 4 Times Square, and 1 Bryant Park. Here you see 4 Times Square and 1 Bryant Park under construction. Building, I have to tell you, building in this city, my father, when he was building, said you needed an architect, an engineer, and 2 psychiatrists. Now you need 2 psychiatrists and perhaps a lobotomy. It's just incredible how difficult it's become to build. We also began residential construction in the 60s. I'm sorry we don't have a slide of our next project on 57th Street. We have the architects from Big here. It's going to be a fantastic building, assuming we get it through we get permission to go forward. 1 Bryant Park is the most environmentally responsible building in the world. If I were Donald, I would say in the known and unknown universe, but I'll be happy with the world. It's a fantastic building. I've been involved in green buildings since we built 4 Times Square. That was the very first green building. When we built that, it was a lucky combination of Fox and Fowl, Dan Tishman, Jody, and myself. We all had a commitment to the environment. We decided we were going to build a green building, but we really didn't know what that meant. What we did, we had a series of retreats out of the office and came up with a plan as to how to build a green building. We followed that format for all the buildings since then. We get all the professionals involved. We sit down and decide how we're, as I said, how we're going to make this a better building. When I started in the business, we would have construction meetings, which would consist for 2 hours of going around the table and the architect blaming the contractor blaming the developer, and just on and on. And I had decided we're not going to do that. What we do is we present solutions at our meetings. I've finally gotten it through that I don't want to hear a problem without a solution. So we spend the time between meetings coming up with solutions and discussing the problems. And then at meetings, we provide the solutions to make sure everybody agrees that's what we want to do. The most important part of building is the pre-planning. We spend more time than most everybody else because we're not going to get a second chance. After we've gone through it, we then usually bring in outside engineers to do a check to make sure that we've not missed something. But I do have, West 57th Residential. This is by big architects. They're opening their office. They've opened your office. We're very excited. The West 57th Street Residential. It's a new shape for New York. We've been working for 3 years to find a design that would please city planning, and I'm pleased to say that with Bjarke Engel's help, we've finally come up with something that city planning has approved. They wanted an iconic building as you come down the West Side Highway, and I think we've certainly done that. We're also involved in the new school with SOM. This is their academic, and there'll be an academic building in the base, and at the top is a dormitory. My father was known for saying that he would only buy property he could walk to. I think Andrew probably heard him say that many times. And I say I'm very lucky that he lived in East Midtown. Our latest project in partnership with the Port Authority is One World Trade Center. It's now about half its height. Here you see it about 60 stories, and to the left you see what it will look like when we get finished. Behind it is 7 World Trade Center. We, as I think everybody knows, we've been working with Condé Nast to bring them down to the building. That is going to change what people think of as downtown. It will no longer be simply the financial center, but it will be the downtown office market that's accessible to all sorts of tenants. A couple of slides on green building. The premium, although the premiums for building silver or gold are very small, under 2%, a platinum building such as One Bryant Park are substantial. But when people talk about the premiums in building, they're not looking at the payback. Most of the additional cost at One Bryant Park is for our cogen and ice plant. The cogen manufactures about 80% of the power required in the building. At night, when there's no demand or little demand, we use the power to make ice, which then cools the building. It'll cool it for about, depending upon the temperature, for 6 to 7 hours. It's extremely efficient. It's approximately a 5-year payback. So while there's a substantial cost, $30 million to build it, it gets paid back. So it's really inappropriate just to look at costs in terms of the green buildings. You do, however, see in a payback in terms of the additional rent that green buildings generate. This is especially true, excuse me, in residential, where people are very concerned about their where they live. Obviously, working in One Bryant Park, I've spoken about it for years. I did not realize how what a difference it makes. At the end of the day, you're not tired. We bring in 4 times as much outside air, and then we filter 95% of the particulate matter. You really just feel completely refreshed in the building. And also we bring in, the building is all glass, so there's a tremendous amount of daylight. In doing that, where you need to expend extra energy to cool the building, but I've been trying to make the point for a while that building a green building is not just about energy, it's about the productivity of the people who work there. There have been studies that show that these types of buildings increase productivity by 10 to 15%. And since the occupancy cost for energy is about 6% of the occupancy cost, while payroll could be 60 or 70%. Obviously, a 10% increase in productivity has a much greater effect than simply reducing energy by 10 or 15%. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the LEED categories. One of the advantages of building in New York City is because of the transportation. Almost you're not using virgin land. Almost every site is sustainable. One Bryant Park, we capture all the rainwater, we recycle all the gray water, and we save about 10 million gallons of water a year. I've gone through most of the other issues here. So just a few comments. As I said, making mistakes is very important. The very first project I was involved in, 78th and Columbus, just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but I learned more from that than any other project I could have been involved in. That was just when I came to New York, and I was partners with Eli Zabar. Eli, as you know, has now opened stores on the East Side, and it's thanks to me that he went back into the food business. I also gave Eli his motto, which is that if you find higher prices elsewhere, I'll gladly raise mine. Let me see what else, other notes. Really what was talked about before is that it's no longer the case where the developer comes in, hires the architect and the contractor and sits back. It's a team effort. Everybody has to work together, to work as a team, to get and to have an involvement and a role in the project, to take ownership, not just of their portion of the design or the construction, but of the entire project, so that as years go by and the building is successful, they can look back and say, I did that. And nothing gives me a greater pleasure than looking at the skyline and seeing 4 Times Square, One Bryant Park, and the other buildings that my family has been involved in. So that's my part of it. If there are questions, I'll be glad to take them.
I think that was one of the most concise yet quietly powerful lectures that have ever been given in this auditorium, given the content matter we just saw. And so I'm going to use director's privilege and ask the first question, and I ask this only semi-facetiously. Why isn't every developer like you? I mean, in the sense that we have a kind of stereotype of what developers are. And then we have someone like yourself who clearly sees that it's important to hire great architects, it's important to build green buildings, it's important to build density where transportation is, all of the things that make us proud to live in a city like New York. Why doesn't the rest of the development community respond to these issues the way that you have?
You know, I don't have an answer to that. When we built 4 Times Square, I thought we were setting an example for everybody as to how a building should be built, and it was at least 10 years before anybody actually picked up on the fact that you could build a green building. Many people asked me, why are you doing that? And my response would always be, why aren't you? I don't have an answer, Sean. I don't know. You worked in that world, so maybe
Well,
you know.
I mean, the emphasis on first costs versus, is it because you tend to hold on to your buildings so you don't, you get to realize the operating cost savings? Is it?
Part of it is because as a family business, we're thinking not many developers are fee-based, and they're just looking to get the building built, get their fee, and move on to the next project. We're going to be building this forever. An example of that is at the top of 4 Times Square. The mechanical equipment is in the top floor, knowing that at some point the equipment would have to be replaced. We created attachments for derricks and hatches in the roof so that we could move that equipment. We're trying to think as far ahead as possible.
Okay, I'm sure there are many, many questions in the audience, so for as much time as you have. So, questions out there?
So is this to say that the future of your buildings will be green, without question?
Oh, yes. We only will build something that's
Do
environmentally.
you feel that your innovations can contribute to the enhancement of the green code, of the LEED code?
Already has.
What we built at 4 Times Square really created the LEED guidelines in that building.
As well as the green building code that the city's now adopted, I think has had a tremendous impact. Other questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little to the firm's history of hiring architects? I mean, when you decided to start hiring name architects, for instance, I'm not as familiar with the older buildings, but I know you've become increasingly connected with well-known and established and highly qualified architects.
And Julie,
Was that always so?
Can you identify your?
I'm Julie Yoving with the Architects newspaper.
We are very relationship driven. We work with somebody until they no longer deserve our to work with us. My father's generation worked with Richard Roth for many years, and most of the early buildings were Emery Roth buildings. When we went to Fox and Fowl, and then when Bank of America agreed to build at 1 Bryant Park, it took us months to convince them to use Fox and Fowl. They wanted to use a different firm that we hadn't worked with. And just as we'd gotten them convinced, Fox and Fowl broke up. That was very difficult. But we are relationship driven, and for many years we would be building one building at a time. So basically we worked with one firm. Now we're starting to build more than one. The new school is SOM. The 57th Street project is big from New York and Denmark. I met Bjarke in Denmark when I was giving a lecture there, and he doesn't recall this, but I recall it very well. He was heckling me and saying, why do your buildings look like buildings? And I got to know him and realized just what a great architect he is. But I don't know if I answered your question, but we try and work with people who have done a good job for us and we know we can rely on.
Do you feel you've gradually been upgrading the quality of the architects you're working with, from Roth to Big, or?
I would. Certainly from Roth to Big, it's that we've upgraded the architecture, yes. But I'm very proud of what Rick Cook and Bob Fox did at One Bryant Park, and I'm equally proud of 4 Times Square from Fox and Powell.
Yes, sir.
You are involved in the Freedom Tower at the World Trade Center. I want to know how many times have the design been revised from the first one by Daniel Libeskind?
Somebody else may know the answer to that better than me, but when we got involved in it in last summer, they were still revising the design. I told them that since the building is halfway up, we have to stick with one design at this point. At least half a dozen times, and there's still being revisions made to the design. We hope to work with SOM to maybe even improve it a little more.
Can you talk about Condé Nast and how that came to pass and what, I mean, it's a very exciting thing for downtown, clearly, so.
Well, just as Condé Nast moved from Madison Avenue in the 90s to Times Square, when Times Square at that point was still a no man's land, and because of that, Cy Newhouse was able to make a very good deal. He is now looking to move to downtown and make another very good deal. He's going to bring all the companies together, and Cy is a very bright guy, and he's going to, he wants to establish the future for Condé Nast for the next 20 years.
More questions?
What are some of your strategies for your existing building stock that is 40 years old that you are holding long term in terms of continually modernizing them, maybe greening them?
Years ago, we replaced all the air conditioning plants. We're upgrading we replaced all the lighting. At 655, we replaced all the windows. So we're constantly improving the energy efficiency of the buildings. There's a lot of those buildings, the floor heights are challenging, but even so, we're keeping them about 95% occupied. But it's really making sure that the mechanical equipment, we upgrade the elevators, so it's really completely rebuilding the buildings every 20 years or so.
Could you discuss how practical it is to upgrade existing commercial buildings with ice plants, which already have air conditioning?
At the first ice plant we put in was put in at 1155. Problems with ice plants is you do need a large space for them, but at 1155, which was finished in 1984, in the 90s, White & Case, the main tenant, needed additional cooling, and it really wasn't feasible to increase the size of the plant to add a cooling tower. So we added the ice plant and added a chiller to make ice, so that way we were able to upgrade the cooling capacity of the building. as long as you have to give up space, but it's a very efficient way to increase the cooling capacity of a building without completely redoing the plant.
Montana?
Can you talk about the method of site or project selection? And how, I mean, with the limited number of projects that you do, usually one or two at a time, how you go about sourcing those deals?
It's really, my father was a great land assembler, and he would see a site that was divided up into many ownerships and would work very hard to put it together. That's almost impossible today because everybody is just focused on the value of their real estate. So our most recent acquisition is a site at 30th to 31st Street where a mortgage was in default. We bought the mortgage and then made a deal with the landowner to release him from his liabilities if he surrendered the property. It's more happenstance where we see a good site that we want to proceed with.
Do you have thoughts on eminent domain going forward, given that sometimes is necessary for holdout parcels for an area-wide redevelopment, whether, how necessary that should be in the future?
My father was a great proponent of having eminent domain where the developer controlled, I think, 90% of the property, because it's always the last one or two holdouts that make it very difficult. So when we built One Bryant Park, we had gone to ESDC and said, if you just say that you'll use eminent domain, that will enable it. They didn't want to use it, but just the threat enabled us to assemble the whole land, the whole site. We had 3 owners there, the most difficult owners in the city, and each of them told us that we should come to them when they were the last holdout.
Yes, Jane.
Thank you very much for sharing. My question is, as a real estate family, how do you unite your family and make sure they work towards the same goal? Thanks.
We've by happenstance, not because we were so clever about it, but we set up a structure where all the assets are owned by a trust, and the properties and the business is operated within the trust. The trust provides distributions to the beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries have no active role in the management of the assets. But any family member can come work in the business. However, they must go through a 2-year period of minimum pay with no responsibilities to make sure that they really are dedicated to working in the business. So we're very pleased with the structure, and if you're a family member and you don't agree to the structure, then you have to sell your assets at a discount, your ownership interest at a discount.
Couple more?
Yeah, sure.
Joe.
Hi.
You really need to know, there are 2 ways to approach it, either because you need to know what it is the tenants want. One of the mistakes I made in the first project I mentioned was building for something I thought I wanted. Eventually it worked, but it took many years. So you need to know what the market wants, and the way to do that is either to be in management, to work with tenants, or to be a broker and to lease or sell to the tenants. But those are the two best ways I see of becoming a developer. It's working for a developer is very difficult to really go out on your own until you know exactly what it is that the market is looking for.
What is your outlook on construction of new projects in the next few years as the economy improves?
I certainly believe that Boston Properties will start its building this year or next year. I don't see an awful lot more construction. Vishaan may disagree with me, but I do not see the yards starting anytime soon, in spite of the fact that Related's going to sign 3 million square feet this year.
You heard it was said in this room not 2 weeks ago. But then he followed it with, and I thought the Miami Dolphins were going to win the Super Bowl. So.
Hi, I'm Laura Kazistan with The Observer, and I was actually wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how the recent trip to China went and if any deals came out of that. And
I'm sorry?
how your trip to China went and if any kind of deals came out of that.
No deals. I wasn't really expecting to go. I was there. It was China wants to have their answer to Davos, so it was at a ski resort, and that's about the only resemblance to Davos that I saw. But it was really to meet the top entrepreneurs in China, and that was very successful. It's fascinating what's going on in China. They're trying to invent an economy, and there was a tremendous discussions going on between the entrepreneurs and the government officials that were there over policies. If you maybe you saw in the papers here that they've recently made it that only if you already live in Beijing can you buy an apartment in Beijing. They're trying to stop the escalation in housing prices, and they also have a terrible traffic problem. So now they've made it illegal for you to own more than one car in Beijing. And the entrepreneurs are arguing for rather than a fiat way of controlling the economy, a more subtle approach to it. So it was really fascinating to see.
You ever think you'll develop anything abroad?
I won't, but my children may.
Other questions? Yeah, Eric.
What's next for 4 Times Square with Condé Nast moving out?
We've had a number of tenants approach us. I can tell you it will not be the Bank of America, but it's a good building, it's good space, so we're not concerned about the space when it becomes available, and it's not for some years off. I think we're looking in the 2015 range. I think the market at that point is going to be very tight, and we think we'll be hitting a very good market at that point.
Yeah.
Your 57th Street site, it's gone through a number of iterations over the years. Can you talk a little bit about knowing when it's right to throw a design away, when it's right to move forward with the design? Is it simply a pro forma? Is it simply a market timing?
Well, that's an example of no matter how smart you think you are and how good a design you have, the things happen that you can't anticipate. We had designed something that we called the Cyber Center for data transmission. It had its own, it was completely off the grid. It had its own backup generators, and it fed into the grid so that it was never down. There was always a spinning generator. And we would cool the processors with the heat that we were generating, and it was extremely efficient. But unfortunately, after 2001, and we spent $15 million designing this facility, we knocked down all the buildings on the site, and we're all set to go ahead. After 2001, the SEC said you could no longer have data processing on Manhattan. So, part of being an entrepreneur is taking risks. That was a risk. We try and not risk in the sense of gambling, but you're a very calculated risk, and here it didn't work out. The Helena, which is at 57th and 11th, we completed that in 2003. We hit a very good market. It's we don't try and time the market. We build when we usually try and build not at the height of the market, but as the market is starting up. But we have 10 million square feet, and what we believe is that by having our leases expire 5 or 10% a year, that we'll sometimes be in a good market, we'll sometimes be in a bad market, but over the time it evens itself out. Yes, ma'am.
What bellwethers do you use to determine when you start a project?
I'm sorry, which what?
What bellwethers, economic bellwethers do you use?
It's really, because we have a sizable base, we can see when there's demand, and that's what leads us to go forward. When we acquired the site at 6th and 30th Street, it was a year ago, and things still did not look good, but we saw that the market was starting to improve, and basically it's my gut, which luckily has grown much bigger over the years.
Okay, maybe one last question.
I noticed that as a family business, you bring in a lot of very smart business practices. Can you explain how you bring new business practices in that make your company move forward?
Not only do we have retreats for each building, we have an annual retreat for the business, in which the retreats, we ask everybody to, we get together, we have some drinks, and throw out your craziest ideas. And so we try and refine what we're doing, trying to improve what we're doing, and that's basically how we do it.
We call those classes.
No, but it's more informal.
Yeah, right. I was so glad you showed that human resources slide, because when Helena was kind enough to bring me through One Bryant Park, I was really struck by how she knew every single person who worked in that building. It was clear that there was a rapport there that is, I think, highly unusual. It's really extraordinary thing. So I think that wraps us up for this evening. I want to thank you so much for spending your time and your efforts with us. Just an amazing, amazing work and organization. Thank you.
Thank you all. Hopefully we'll put the library together soon and we can make that announcement.
No, that's great. We're very excited about it. Whenever you're